The twin sisters had been waiting for this trip for months, their bags packed neatly with clothes and books, their eyes bright with excitement as they finally stepped onto the plane. They found their seats near the window, whispering to each other about the places they would visit and the memories they would make. For them, it felt like the beginning of a small adventure, one they had looked forward to with hope and joy. The cabin buzzed softly, with passengers settling in, the sound of seatbelts clicking, and overhead bins shutting, and everything felt normal until the announcement came. A voice from the crew broke the cheerful rhythm of boarding, calling for everyone's attention, and though the words were polite, there was something in the tone that carried a weight the twins could not ignore. They exchanged a quick glance, the excitement in their faces dimming just a little, as a group of airline staff began walking purposefully down the aisle. The smiles that had greeted passengers earlier were gone. Instead, their expressions were stern, almost guarded, as if they were searching for someone. The sisters sat very still, their hearts quickening, wondering what was happening, and to their unease, the staff stopped right beside their row. Passengers nearby tilted their heads curiously, some leaning slightly to catch what was going on, while the twins felt an invisible spotlight suddenly pressed down on them. One of the staff members asked them to confirm their names, and though the question was ordinary, the tone carried a strange coldness, as if suspicion lingered beneath the surface. The twins answered politely, their voices low but steady, though inside they felt an ache of nervousness that words could not hide. The crew exchanged glances among themselves, whispering in hushed tones that only made the girls' anxiety grow heavier. The other passengers now had stopped their quiet conversations, their eyes darting toward the scene, their curiosity feeding the tension in the air. The twins, who had done nothing more than take their seats and buckle in, began to wonder if some mistake had been made, but the staff did not explain. Instead, one attendant gestured for them to wait as he spoke into his radio, his words clipped and serious. Minutes stretched out painfully, each second making the sisters more uneasy, their earlier joy shrinking into confusion and fear. Why were they being singled out? What had they done wrong? They could feel their fellow passengers watching, whispering, making assumptions, and though they wanted to ask for answers, something in the sharp look of the staff kept them silent. The excitement of the journey had melted away, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on their hearts. It was only the beginning of the trip, yet it already felt as though the story was taking a turn they had never expected. And as they sat there clutching their seatbelts tighter, they sensed that something far more unsettling was about to unfold. The silence in the cabin grew heavier as the staff's whispers turned into direct orders, and the twins, still strapped into their seats, were told to stand up and come with them. Their hearts pounded as they obeyed, their hands trembling slightly as they unclipped their seatbelts, glancing at each other for courage. They had followed every rule from the moment they walked into the airport, arriving on time, checking their luggage properly, going through security without issue, and boarding calmly yet. Now they were being treated as if they had broken some unspoken law. The attendants offered no explanation, only firm gestures that left no room for questions, and the twins felt as though every pair of eyes in the cabin was now fixed on them. Passengers whispered to one another, some curious, some suspicious, while others frowned in sympathy, but no one spoke up. The walk down the narrow aisle felt endless, each step heavy with shame they did not deserve, and the twins could feel the invisible judgment pressing against their backs. They were escorted to a space near the exit door, where the lead attendant's voice dropped lower. His words clipped and official as he told them they would need to leave the aircraft. Confusion struck them like a wave, and one of the sisters managed to ask why, her voice soft but steady, only to be met with a vague response that there had been concerns. The phrase was empty, offering no clarity, only deepening the ache of humiliation building inside them. They exchanged nervous glances, silently asking each other the same unspoken question. What concerns? What had they done? The more they thought, the more helpless they felt, because there was nothing to point to, no mistake they could recall, nothing that would justify such treatment. Around them, the buzz of passengers' whispers continued, feeding an atmosphere of quiet tension, and though the twins wanted to defend themselves, they felt trapped by the authority of the uniformed crew. Their young faces burned with both fear and pride, fear at being singled out, and pride that refused to let tears fall in front of strangers. They stood silently, side by side, their backs straight, despite the weight of injustice pressing down on them. The longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became that this was no misunderstanding that would quickly pass. It was something larger, something unfair, and the staff's coldness made it clear they would not be given the dignity of an explanation. As they waited for what would come next, the sisters felt the strange mix of dread and resolve building inside them, unaware that this moment, though painful, was only the beginning of a series of events that would change everything, not only for them, but for the airline itself. As the twins were guided down the aisle, toward the exit, the weight of dozens of eyes pressed heavily upon them, and what had once been a cabin filled with casual chatter now felt like a stage where they were unwilling performers. Their cheeks flushed with quiet shame, not because they had done anything wrong, but because the silence around them was broken only by whispers that carried judgment they could not control. Some passengers leaned close to one another, murmuring with raised brows, while others shook their heads as though they had already decided the girls must have been guilty of something. The twins kept their chins high, though their eyes betrayed the sting of confusion, each step feeling like a punishment for a crime they had never committed. The narrow aisle stretched endlessly, their every move magnified under the weight of unspoken accusations, and the stillness of their lips only deepened the mystery for those watching. The flight attendants walked briskly, their stiff postures giving the impression of authority, and yet none offered the dignity of an explanation. The young girls, who only moments earlier had been planning their journey with excitement, now felt stripped of their joy, standing at the center of unwanted attention. A mother traveling with her child glanced at them with sympathy, her eyes soft, but her voice silent, while another passenger whispered into his phone as though the event unfolding before him was something to report. It was not just the removal itself, but the way it was done in full view of strangers, with cold efficiency that cut deepest, for the twins felt their dignity slipping away with every step they took toward the open cabin door. Outside, the bright lights of the boarding gate waited, but behind them, the muffled murmurs continued, growing louder as speculation spread among the passengers left behind. The girls' hearts beat with a rhythm of hurt and disbelief, their confusion sharper because not a single reason had been given to justify the humiliation. Their quiet presence had caused no disruption, their obedience had been flawless, yet here they were, singled out, judged by silence, and condemned without words. They exchanged a glance as they stepped onto the jet bridge, their eyes reflecting both fear and an unspoken promise not to break in front of strangers. Though the shame clung to them like a shadow, there was something steady in the way they held each other's gaze, something that whispered of strength they had not yet discovered. What none of the onlookers knew was that this public moment, filled with whispers and embarrassment, was not the end of the story, but the very beginning of a storm that would soon sweep through the airline itself, rewriting not only how the twins were seen, but how the truth would demand to be heard. The twins sat quietly in the waiting area, just beyond the gate, their small hands clutching the straps of their bags, as though holding tighter might somehow make the hurt lighter. The busy airport moved around them in a blur of footsteps, rolling suitcases and faint announcements echoing through the speakers, but in their corner, time felt heavy and still. They had been removed from the plane in front of everyone, made to feel as if they were guilty of something, yet no one had told them what that something was. Their eyes burned from holding back tears, each blink heavy with the weight of humiliation, but both refused to let the tears fall, remembering their father's words about facing the world with strength. He trusted them, always reminding them to be calm in difficult moments, to show maturity even when they felt like breaking inside. But now, sitting on the hard chairs in silence, they wondered how they would explain what had just happened. How could they describe the looks from strangers, the whispers that cut deeper than words, the empty explanations from staff that gave them no chance to defend themselves? One sister leaned against the other, their closeness offering comfort when words failed. And though their lips stayed pressed shut, their minds raced with the same questions. Why us? Why now? What did we do? Every sound around them seemed too loud, every laugh from passing travelers, a cruel reminder of the joy they had lost. Their hearts longed for the warmth of their father's presence, but at the same time, they feared telling him, afraid he might think they hadn't been careful enough, even though deep inside they knew they had done nothing wrong. A soft sigh escaped one of them, breaking the silence, and it carried the pain of being judged without reason, punished without cause. They stared at the floor, the shine of polished tiles blurring under their damp eyes, wishing the ground could swallow their shame. Minutes felt like hours, their thoughts circling with no answers, until finally they realized they could not hide this from their father. He had always told them that the truth must never be hidden, even when it was hard to speak, and that reminder gave them just enough courage to prepare for the call. Still, fear lingered in their hearts, not fear of him, but fear of his disappointment, fear that his trust in their maturity would fade. The silence between them stretched once more, heavy and unbroken, their unshed tears shimmering like a secret storm, and in that stillness, they knew that whatever came next would change more than just the trip they had been waiting for. It would touch their family, their dignity, and perhaps even the name of the airline that had treated them so unfairly. When their father finally answered the phone, his voice was steady, carrying the calmness of someone used to solving problems under pressure. Yet beneath that calm there was an edge that made the twins both relieved and nervous. They spoke hesitantly at first, their words tumbling over each other as they tried to explain what had happened, how they had been asked to leave the plane without being told why, how people had stared, how they had held back their tears. For a moment, there was silence on his end, and in that silence, the twins felt their hearts pound louder, wondering if he would be disappointed. But then his voice returned, low and measured, filled with reassurance, as he told them they had done nothing wrong. That reminder washed over them like a shield, easing the weight of doubt that had clung to their hearts. Yet, as he asked them to repeat the details carefully, his tone sharpened ever so slightly, like steel beneath velvet, and they could sense the storm that was building behind his calm words. He was not only their father, the man who guided them with kindness and strength, but also a respected CEO, someone who commanded authority in boardrooms, and whose decisions shaped the futures of thousands. The airline staff had not known this when they dismissed his daughters so carelessly, but they would soon realize it. After listening quietly, he took a slow breath and told them not to worry, to sit tight and leave the matter in his hands. Then, with the same calmness that had comforted them, he ended the call and reached for another phone, the one he used when decisions had to be made swiftly and effectively. His voice, when he spoke to the airline's headquarters, lost its softness. It was firm, precise, and filled with power that could not be ignored. The people on the other end responded quickly, their tones shifting from casual to concerned as they recognized who they were speaking to. Words like immediate action and unacceptable conduct passed firmly through his lips, and the weight of his authority pressed heavily through the line. The twins, sitting together in the waiting area, did not hear the details of his conversation, but they could feel the effect of it beginning to ripple around them. Steph, who had once avoided their gaze, now glanced nervously in their direction. Whispers spread among employees as radios crackled with urgent voices, and the atmosphere that had felt cold and dismissive only moments ago now vibrated with a tension of a different kind, the kind that comes when power begins to shift. The twins, still holding each other's hands tightly, could sense something changing, though they could not yet imagine just how far their father's calm but commanding call would reach, or how completely it would turn the situation upside down when the news spread through the airport staff that the twins' father was not just any parent, but a well-known CEO whose name carried weight in every business circle. The same employees who had so easily dismissed the girls now found themselves frozen in disbelief. A wave of unease rippled through the team as radios crackled with hurried voices. Supervisors rushed in, and the attendants who had spoken so coldly before exchanged nervous glances, their confidence suddenly stripped away. They had treated the sisters as if they were ordinary passengers without a voice, certain their actions would go unquestioned. But now, every step they had taken, every word they had spoken, came back to haunt them under the heavy light of accountability. The memory of how they had escorted the girls down the aisle, the sharpness in their tone, the refusal to explain, replayed in their minds like a scene they wished they could rewrite. Some shifted uncomfortably, their posture stiff with regret, while others tried to look busy, hoping not to be called out. Yet all of them felt the same chill, the realization that their casual dismissal of two quiet passengers could turn into a storm larger than any of them had imagined. The tension grew as senior managers appeared, their expressions dark with concern, and the staff knew instantly that this was not going to be brushed aside. They whispered among themselves, their voices trembling, wondering how much the father knew, how much power he truly held, and what consequences might follow. The very authority they had once used to intimidate the girls now seemed fragile, as if it could crumble at the slightest push. Some attendants bit their lips, silently wishing they had listened more carefully, had treated the sisters with basic respect instead of rushing to judgment. The airport, which only moments ago felt like familiar ground where they were in control, now seemed like a stage where they stood exposed, their actions magnified, their choices ready to be questioned by someone far greater than them. They were caught between fear of their managers and guilt over what they had done, a mix that made every second stretch painfully longer. The faces of the twins, calm but wounded, lingered in their minds, a reminder of the human cost of their carelessness. And though no words of punishment had yet been spoken, the staff could already feel the weight of consequences pressing close, knowing that the call made by the girl's father had not only shaken the walls of the airline's headquarters, but had also broken through the fragile shield behind which they had hidden their arrogance. The father of the twins sat at his desk, his phone in hand, his face calm yet unreadable. And while most people in his position might have raised their voice in anger, he knew that true power never needed to shout. With one measured breath, he dialed directly to the airline's top leadership, bypassing the layers of staff who usually acted as a shield. And when his call was answered, his tone was steady but firm, each word cutting with the precision of someone who was used to being heard. He explained, in careful detail, how his daughters had been treated, how they were removed from the plane without a reason, humiliated in front of strangers, and left to sit in silence as if they were guilty of something they had never done. His voice did not waver, yet every syllable carried the weight of truth. And on the other end of the line, the executives who were used to dismissing complaints felt a chill they could not ignore. He did not beg, nor did he threaten. Instead, he demanded fairness, dignity, and accountability, reminding them that respect should never be decided by assumptions or appearances. The silence that followed his words was thick, and though no one dared interrupt him, he could sense the unease in their breathing, the shuffle of papers, the nervous coughs of leaders suddenly caught in a storm they had not prepared for. He continued, pointing out that their airline prided itself on customer service and safety. Yet here they had allowed arrogance and prejudice to humiliate two young passengers who had done nothing but follow the rules. His words were not just about his daughters. They were about a principle larger than any single flight, and as he spoke, the executives realized this was not a matter they could bury or delay. The father's reputation as a CEO, a man known for integrity and sharp judgment, meant his complaint carried far more weight than that of an ordinary traveler, and they knew that ignoring him would bring consequences far beyond a single incident. As the call ended, the father leaned back in his chair, his expression still calm, his hands steady, for he had said what needed to be said, and he knew the weight of his words would ripple through the airline like a stone dropped into still water. Meanwhile, in the airport, where his daughters waited, staff members moved with sudden urgency, radios buzzing, supervisors whispering frantically, because the higher authority had been reached, and the ground beneath their confidence was shifting faster than they could control. The atmosphere in the airport shifted so suddenly that even the passengers who had been quietly watching felt the change. For only moments ago, the twins had been sitting in silence, their eyes lowered as whispers floated around them. And now, a wave of activity broke the stillness as supervisors rushed into the waiting area, their faces tight with urgency. The staff who had once spoken to the sisters with arrogance and coldness now avoided eye contact, their confident tone replaced with nervous stammers. And within minutes, apologies began to tumble out, though none of them sounded steady, for they were no longer in control of the situation. The twins, still holding their hands together for comfort, looked up in surprise as the same people who had treated them with suspicion now spoke softly, almost desperately, trying to undo the damage that had already been done. One supervisor bent slightly forward, his voice carefully polite, explaining that there must have been a misunderstanding, while another assured them that the airline deeply valued its passengers. But the sudden sweetness in their words only made it clearer how quickly fear had replaced arrogance. The other travelers, sensing something significant had happened, leaned closer in their seats, whispering about the unusual change, their curiosity growing as they tried to guess what power had forced the airline into such a dramatic reversal. The girls listened quietly, unsure how to respond, but they could see it now. The weight of their father's influence was pressing down on the very people who had dismissed them, and though the staff did not mention his name, their anxious expressions told the whole story. Phones rang, radios buzzed, and supervisors whispered in corners, their once firm control of the scene slipping away, and every passing second made it clearer that the airline realized the depth of its mistake. The same twins who had been treated as if they were unworthy of a seat were now being offered respect, care, and hurried promises that everything would be set right. But the shift was so sharp that it only deepened the tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for the next revelation to drop. In that moment, the embarrassment the sisters had felt began to change into something else, a quiet strength. For they could see the truth unfolding before them, that sometimes justice did not come in shouts or protests, but in the silent power of influence and integrity. The turning point had arrived, and everyone present knew it, though few would ever forget how quickly arrogance could crumble when faced with accountability. The passengers who had been watching from their seats, whispering earlier about the strange treatment of the twins, now leaned back with wide eyes as the truth slowly became clear, and their hushed voices carried a new weight. They had seen the girls escorted out without reason, treated like troublemakers when all they had done was sit quietly, and now those same staff members who once acted with authority stood in discomfort, their polished confidence crumbling as they bowed with apologies. Murmurs spread across the waiting area, not of judgment toward the girls anymore, but of shock and recognition, for everyone could now see how quickly assumptions had turned into injustice. A man in the back whispered to his wife that no one should be judged without proof, while a young traveler near the gate shook his head and muttered that respect should be given to every passenger, no matter their background. The twins, still quiet and composed, became symbols of something larger than themselves, as those around them began to reflect on the scene unfolding before their eyes. It was not just about two sisters anymore. It was about how easy it was for power to be misused when arrogance went unchecked. The supervisors tried to smooth the tension with polite words, But the crowd had already formed its opinion, and in their silence there was a lesson louder than any announcement over the speakers. The hum of voices grew as people compared notes with strangers sitting nearby, agreeing that what they had witnessed was unfair and unnecessary, and soon the idea spread that perhaps this incident would serve as a reminder, not just to the airline, but to everyone present that true respect does not come from badges, uniforms, or titles, but from the simple act of treating others with dignity. The twins glanced at each other, realizing that though they had suffered embarrassment only moments ago, they had also become the reason strangers were quietly questioning the world around them. The crowd's whispers carried a tone of awakening, the kind that sticks in memory, and though no one spoke to the sisters directly, they knew the story would be carried forward in countless retelling, a quiet reminder that assumptions can wound, and fairness is not optional, but essential. And as the girls sat there, their father's calm voice still echoing in the minds of the trembling staff, the public's watchful eyes turned the entire moment into something unforgettable, an unspoken promise that this lesson would not be ignored. The airport felt quieter as the twins walked out beside their father, not because the noise had stopped, but because their minds were filled with the weight of what had just happened, and though their steps were steady, their hearts carried both the sting of humiliation and the strength of survival. They had entered the plane like any other passengers, full of excitement for their trip, only to be pulled aside, accused without reason, and treated as though they were less. But now, leaving the terminal under the calm guidance of their father, they understood something far greater than travel or pride. Their father did not storm or shout. He walked with them silently, his presence enough to remind them that true power does not need to prove itself loudly. And in that silence, the girls felt protected, yet also aware that they had been changed. The scene replayed in their minds, the whispers of the passengers, the shame of being escorted out, the mocking arrogance of the staff, and then the sudden shift when their father's quiet authority overturned everything. It was not the victory of wealth or status that stayed with them, but the truth of what dignity meant, that even in their quiet tears, they had chosen to stand firm, to hold their ground, and not allow lies to make them small. As they walked past the curious eyes still following them, they realized people had seen more than just a misunderstanding. They had seen a lesson about justice, about how quickly assumptions can collapse when truth steps forward. The twins knew they would never forget the way their father's single phone call turned the tide. But deeper than that, they would remember his calmness, his refusal to lower himself to anger, his belief that respect must always be demanded with dignity, not rage. Their hearts were still heavy with the sting of unfairness, yet stronger with the memory of how it ended. And they understood that in life there would always be moments when they were judged, doubted, or underestimated, but justice, though sometimes delayed, always found its way to the surface. They held their heads higher as they left, not because of who their father was, but because of what they had discovered about themselves, that truth does not need to shout to be heard. It simply waits, steady and unwavering, until the world has no choice but to listen. And though the day had begun as a painful trial, it became a turning point, a memory they would carry forever, whispering to them in every challenge ahead, dignity is not given by others. It is carried within, and when truth is on your side, it always stands firm in the end.